All right, so everyone knows to use a Monte Carlo scenario to project investment rates of return relative to your retirement plan. Makes sense. Why don't we do the same for inflation? Anyway, just hit me. Oh, here comes somebody. Hold on a second. Just hit me the other day when I was looking at, maybe 2 days ago, when I was looking at the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, spreadsheet data. I said, man, there's a lot of volatility in CPI, inflation numbers. Why are we only using a linear rate of return? And I said, no one does that for investment rates of return. And this is where we got the 4% rule from banging, the 4.4 from the Trinity and all that, which, I take issue with not their ruling because this makes sense, how they used it. But I take issue that people's expenditures go up with inflation each and every year. There's no evidence of that, man, just none. And not because of banging or Trinity, it's just what everybody's always said. Well, with 3% inflation, we should adjust for our expenditures to deal with that. But we have a volatile Monte Carlo portfolio. And again, Monte Carlo simply says, what is your average rate of return? What's your standard deviation? We're going to go within 3 standard deviations. That means between 99.8% of the time will be between our probabilities. All right. And so if I have let me just draw this out. If I have a 10% rate of return projection, 10% is my mean average rate of return, and I have a 15 standard deviation. So my standard deviation would be 15. That means within 3 standard deviations, I should be plus minus 45. All right. So on the negative side, I should be negative 35% down, and I should be plus 55% on the up, and that will give me a probability with a 99.8% probability. That's how Monte Carlos work and the standard deviations and whatnot. So with a Monte Carlo, we're just running those different iterations hundreds if not thousands of times to say your portfolio has an average rate of return of 10, a standard deviation of 15. So given that all these inputs, we think, given 96% probability of having money left over when you die. All right, and again, I'm shooting for a 75%. Well, that makes sense because the old days, if everyone's saying we're going to get a 10% rate of return each and every year, we're going to go to the moon, astronauts to the moon. And you're saying, well, that's great. So if I just take 8% a year off, that means I should be netting 2% each and every year and never touch my principal. But it doesn't work like that because the markets go like this, up and down. CPI does the same damn thing. Let me show you. So here's the CPI-U going back from 1914. Ironically, this is the date 1913 is when the Federal Reserve came into being. And that's when we started calculating inflation in terms of CPI-U and whatnot, which, whatever. And we calculated inflation before, but be that as it may. So we're going to go over here. Here's our annual, and we're just going to touch on this guy real quick if I can get this out of the way. Hold on a second. Keep your eye on this right here. You can see we had 118. And this is World War II, World War I, negative 1, 0, lots of volatility, negative 9, negative 9.9, negative 5.1, negative 2, 10, 6, can I get it 14? Yes, I can in 1947, 8.1 in 1949, negative in 1950, and you get lots of volatility there. Look at that, all kinds. There's those 1974, 1979, 80, 81, 82, just lots of volatility. Look at that. And then it starts to level off. But even here in the latter part of the 30 years, it's still been pretty volatile relative to a linear rate of return. So anyway, so what I did going back to 1914, our average inflation was 3.2. But the volatility, the standard deviation, was 4.7. So within 3 standard deviations, we could have an inflation as high as 17.3% or as low as 10.9. So to use a 3% average rate of return, 3.2 to be exact, when we could have a negative 10.9 or a positive 17.3, seems kind of silly, doesn't it? Because you're like, I'm going to increase my expenditures by 3.2% each and every year, regardless of what the real rate of inflation does. That doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't do that in your investment returns. You shouldn't do it in inflation either. In fact, it's very interesting. If we look, we actually went into the 4th standard deviation in terms of high inflation. We had an 18% inflation in 1918. So that's going back to 1914. So I said, well, if we just went over my life, So in my life, the average rate of inflation was 4%. All right, so it's higher than the average from 1914 on. But 4%, but our standard deviation dropped from 4.7 to 2.8. So the standard deviation was less, which means the high side was less on the high inflation, and there was really no deflation other than in 2008 or 9. I forgot what year. But anyway, so the low side, we never came close. On the high side, I think we beat the high side, though. If we go to annual, I think in 1974, we beat 11 right there. 1980, we beat we went into the fourth standard deviation again. And going to the fourth standard deviation of financial numbers isn't that extraordinary. It's just not. So our high side is 12.4. We actually had 13.5 in terms of the high side. So that was in the fourth standard deviation. Anyway, so from 1990 to 2021, our average inflation was only 2.5 with much lower volatility, i.e. standard deviation. All right, so here, though, we still have a high side of 6.1. That's the highest we've seen since 1990 to 2021, 6.1 within 3 standard deviations, and a low side of -1. So again, we haven't come anywhere near the low side. I think in 2008 we were at 2009 is 0.4. So we haven't come anywhere near. So we're well within the third standard deviation on the deflationary side. I don't think we came 6.1 from 1990 to 2021. I don't think we got anywhere near that. No, we didn't. We got 4.7 in 2021. However, we know for a fact we've blown through this now in 2022. This is 2021, as you can see right there. So we burned through this now in 2022. So to use a 2.5% inflation would be silly because in 2022 we had a significantly higher than 2.5. It doesn't make sense. In fact, we burned through well beyond the third standard deviation for the last 30 years, 31 years, frankly. So 99.8% of the time, we should have a high inflation, no more than 6.1. We've had 9.1 in 2022. That's nuts. I don't even know what that standard deviation is relative to, fifth, sixth? I have no idea. Anyway, I thought it'd be neat to look at 1990 on. You can see if we see it in red, we're just doing a Monte Carlo here is all we're doing. Not Monte Carlo, standard deviation. I guess we are doing a Monte Carlo. But we're just basically doing a bunch of different, if I can find the formula. Normal, I'm not sure what the INV stands for. Essentially a random, it's a Monte Carlo is basically what it is. So basically we're saying, okay, our standard, right here, our mean inflation, average inflation is 2.9. Our standard deviation is 1.19. And what's the range we get? So right here, and we got a 6.84, which is much above the high side with the 99.8. I don't know if we have so this would be the range of inflations that you would do in a Monte Carlo. You say some years we got 0, some years we got 6. I think we had 1 year of deflation, but it changes all the time. Let's see here. So basically, the last 30 years, right here, deflation here in 2000. This is the 93rd trial. The 4.7. I mean, you see this. There's another deflation. You can change it. I mean, it changes all the time. So we've had 2 deflations, and I ran, I think, 250 trials. We had a 5. I see a 5 in there. Do I see another 6? I saw another 5 right there, 5.1. There's a third deflation. So basically, I have 250 trials. We had 3 deflations for the last 30 years. 4. Okay, good. I didn't realize we had 4. But we can change this however we want. Now, what you'll see here, if we go to the 1970 to 2021, much more volatility. Our standard deviation is at 8.59, and you can see a lot more deflations. And then if we go to 1914 on, our standard deviation is much higher, and red is deflation, a lot more red here. Look at all those reds. All right, so what do you use? Do you use the last 30 years, the last 50 years, or the entirety of basically the BLS? Well, either way, you shouldn't use a linear inflation number. Let me do my thing here. Because if you use a linear one, you're completely assuming what has never happened. We don't have inflation on a linear. What did I do with my pen? We don't have a linear inflation each and every year, just like we don't have a linear stock market return or even a bond market return. So we're working on Dan Colbert and his model here, 55e.co, and he's added, and I haven't done it yet, but he's added a Monte Carlo on inflation. I haven't looked at it yet, but anyway, so I'll report back to you once I mess around with it, because I'm very much looking forward to it. Because you need to have a Monte Carlo for inflation too. How we actually do that, I haven't done it yet. We're gonna have to find out, but it's gonna be pretty fun. And I mean, again, so this, what do I do with my pen, man? Anyway, so let me just show what I'm talking about again. I used to have a blue one in here. I used to have all kinds of markers. Now I can't find them. All right, so I use the black dry erase. So again, we don't use a linear rate of return on stocks, because that'd be stupid. We use a volatile rate of return on stocks. Ups and downs, Monte Carlo. All right, so why would you then use a volatile rate of return on stocks and assume a linear inflation? So there's a linear inflation with a volatile return on stocks. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. More to come. Hang with me. We'll see you guys. Love your thoughts.